Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Stephen and I this morning on our webinar where we'll be talking about irrigation, advances in irrigation and irrigation management and where the bucket test fits in. We might just wait a couple more minutes to see if there's other people who have RSVP'd who'd like to join, but this webinar is being recorded, so if either you have to duck away early or for those who had hoped to make it but aren't able to join in, we'll be sending the recording through once it's finished. So it's in a webinar, it's a little bit hard to chat amongst yourselves, isn't it? But feel free to put a little chat message in the chat if you'd like to do that. Yeah, still a few people joining. So I hope wherever you are in New Zealand that it's not too bad a day. We've had some pretty rough weather, reminding us that spring in New Zealand is a tumultuous time. It's even though we started with some pretty lovely days. I think there's more rain and wind yet to come across the country. I myself am sitting in Taupo, which is actually lovely and sunny. So I started the day in Wellington, which was not. I think that's where you are, Stephen.
Yes, I'm in Wellington, and it's still not. No, a little bit windy and wet here today.
Yes, I think it's hopefully this weather will pass through and we'll get to have for the second half of the school holidays. For those of you who have little kiddies at home, I'm sure you're hoping for some better weather. Well, I think maybe we might kick off, and then, as I say, the recordings the webinars are going to be recorded. So if people do join later on, they'll be able to catch it from the start later on. So yes, so welcome everyone. Thank you very much for taking out some time this morning to listen to our presentation around the bucket test and how you get the best out of it, and just some different things that are happening in irrigation management that where things might be heading in the future. So what I'd like to do, Stephen and I are just going to go through a short presentation, and if you have some questions as we go through, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And we will have some time at the end of the webinar when if you've got specific questions as well that you want to have addressed. So I'll share my screen and we can kick off. So for those of you that don't don't know who we are, I like to introduce myself, Bridget Hawkins. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for CropX, based here in New Zealand. And CropX has acquired my company Regen about 3 years ago, and we have been involved in delivering to you the Bucket Test app in partnership with Irrigation New Zealand for about 5 years. So I'd also like to introduce Stephen McNally, who I'm sure many of you on the call will know. Stephen is the Principal Technical Advisor for Irrigation New Zealand, and Stephen's been deeply involved in irrigation and the codes of conduct, and working closely with regional councils and irrigation schemes in terms of training and standards, and really a lot, has deep understanding of the evolution of irrigation management here in New Zealand and internationally as well. So thank you very much, Stephen, for joining us today.
Thanks,
so
Bridget.
What we're going to cover is we're first going to have a bit of a look on some of the things that are happening in irrigation that are new and coming. And may change the way that we think about irrigation and irrigation management particularly. Then we're also going to spend a bit of time just looking at the bucket test and where it fits in terms of irrigation management and how you can get the best out of it in terms of using it as a tool to be as efficient as you can be. And then round out by looking at what are some really easy but powerful tools that can be used today and available today in terms of good irrigation management. So firstly, I just want to touch on three sort of different areas that I think are really advancing a lot in terms of the technologies that are going to come to how we think about irrigation and getting the most of that balance between the soil, the crop that's being grown, its water needs, and our ability to act more in real time. Irrigation obviously is, the very basic thing of applying water to supplement what nature's not able to provide to get the best out of the crop. And one of those things is actually, the key thing is understanding, well, what actually are the plant's needs and how much water is still in the soil. And today we do that predominantly through using direct measures of soil moisture. And everybody, who's currently doing that and involved in that service knows that there's quite a few limitations with soil moisture measurements themselves. They're certainly at advance on knowing nothing. But what you do know is the soil moisture of that particular area where you're taking the measurement. So one area that there's quite a lot of work being done over the years, and there's different products starting to come to the market now, is where people are saying, can we, as the pivot or the irrigation system's actually moving across a field, is it possible to take measurements of, say, evapotranspiration or radiant heat of the canopy and develop algorithms to understand what a crop's needs variably will be across that field as the pivot's moving across, and then being connected through to the irrigation controller to then be able to apply water as it's needed. So this, this is something that different research has been worked on for quite a number of years, and there are significant advances, and I think that we will be seeing quite soon these types of options coming to be used in a commercial sense. Another area I think that's it's sort of aligned to that is in terms of sensors that are actually directly plugging into trees or crops that have a sort of a sturdier base, where they're measuring things like the flow of sap in them. And so this is a different way of trying to understand how much water is the plant needing, is the plant in stress, and therefore how much water does it need. And again, there's been various tools and devices in the market for quite some time, but we're seeing more and more of them. And some of you are probably aware of different startups, based here in New Zealand that have been making quite significant advances with these technologies. And so this is another thing that's coming that I think that we will see implemented, particularly in the horticultural situations in the near term. And then the final one is around using satellite data or what's called sensorless ways of deriving soil moisture. And again, this is not a new concept, but the advances in satellite imagery, the analytics based on satellite imagery, linking that with what's known about the soil, and then also the ability to combine, if you've got a satellite imagery, but you also have sensors, to then be able to create models that essentially create a profile of soil moisture completely across a whole area, even though you don't have a soil moisture sensor, and obviously in every spot. So again, this is like thinking about how do we take account of the variability that we know that there is under any irrigation system. I think, particularly here in New Zealand, that variability of soil type and water holder capacity, what that then means for the water requirements, the best way to irrigate is always been very challenging. And again, as I said, soil moisture measures are they're great for the position they're in, but they're not necessarily representative of the whole area. So this type of technology, which is taking that satellite information and matching it up with direct measures, think is going to be able to take us to the next level in terms of understanding, and therefore, and again, linking back into irrigation systems and the ability to apply water variably. So there's a lot of different stuff that is coming down the track, and will be available to test and try and see how they fit into your own situation. But one thing, though, I think with irrigation is it's really important not to ignore the basics. So as with most things, if you do the basic fundamental principles well, you're pretty much, you're more than halfway there in actually getting the job done. So what we want to really step back here and say, well, when it comes to irrigation management and the role of the bucket test, how does that fit in with this concept of actually being focused and delivering on the basics of good irrigation management? So I'm going to hand over to Stephen, and initially just to give a bit of a background on how the bucket test came to be, and then just a bit more about how you can actually use it. So over to you, Stephen.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Look, yes, as Bridget said, I've been involved with various forms of irrigation, but concerningly, nearly 40 years I've been dealing with pumping and getting water to crops and plants. And what Bridget's saying about understanding the basics, when we're, as an organisation, dealing with farmers, talking about the fundamentals of irrigation, the level of understanding of soils and crop requirements has certainly improved dramatically. There's a lot of equipment and sensing technology, as Bridget was talking about, and there's a lot of data that's available to farmers and growers. The important part is also knowing, is your equipment operating correctly? Is your irrigator actually doing what it was designed to do and the way it was installed? So looking back, the Bucket Test app was pretty much developed to drive a conversation. So the conversation about effective freshwater management and good practice was coming through codes of practice that Irrigation New Zealand was involved with. And a lot of that was around KPIs, key performance indicators. And there's some pretty fundamental ones around distribution uniformity, the depth of application, and the application intensity. And if you understand those three things of your irrigator equipment, like Bridget said, you're a long way through the ability to then manage your water effectively. And you manage your water, you manage your energy, you manage your labour input for the best crop productivity. So the app was built on international understanding of what those KPIs were and how you go about robustly measuring a system with some statistical techniques and to produce numbers that were meaningful. But it was always intended as almost a farmer-friendly tool, and that wasn't certainly not saying it was dumbing it down. It was simply making it so that it was a method that was able to be conducted by a farmer to get a quick understanding at a fairly gross level of the performance of their system using equipment they might have and the number of buckets that they might have on hand. So over the evolution of the method, CropX taken that original tool and thinking and used their development resources to make it a really user-friendly app that can be downloaded pretty much by anyone from the appropriate app store. So next slide, yeah. Bridget. Right. Yeah. So what the bucket test is and what it isn't. So what it is it's pretty simple. It's user-friendly. It allows you to use your buckets, set them out according to the instructions on the screen, and capture the information. So it's relatively easy to do. But behind it is some robust analysis. The mathematics behind it as to how it deals with the calculation and the the data that you collect from your buckets is based on standard performance assessment processes. And the app covers lots of irrigator types. So it will cover not only pivot irrigators, which is kind of where one of the original issues with distribution uniformity came from, but it covers multi-sprinkler spray lines. It covers traveling irrigators, etc. But it produces reports, and I think Bridget's going to pull up some of those shortly, that focuses on those 3 KPIs. So distribution uniformity, depth of application, and intensity or rate of application. But what it isn't a full performance assessment. So a full performance assessment, according to the Irrigation New Zealand Code of Practice, involves a lot more than just the bucket test. Bucket testing is certainly part of a performance assessment. The Code of Practice that we use uses generally more buckets than the app does, but it's sized to the nature of the investigation that you're trying to achieve. But it also uses a lot more observations that the performance assessor would go through, which are around flows and pressures, and particularly around the performance of pump stations and what the pumps are doing. So it does give you an indication, but it doesn't necessarily tell you if the report shows in orange or red, and we'll pop those up shortly as to what those categories mean. It doesn't necessarily tell you what is wrong with the system, where the problem may be occurring. But it's a good first indicator.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point, isn't it, Stephen? That if you think about it as a screening tool at a high level but robust level, you get to understand where you're at where your irrigation system is at with these really key things. But it's not the answer to any questions, and if there are any issues, then that generally requires some more professional input. So as you said, here's an example of a couple of test reports of a rotary boom, and so I think it will be quite useful perhaps if you just had it through what there is here to see and what the report can tell you, and then the actions that this particular irrigator should then probably do.
Yeah, so this sort of report is the printed report, Bridget, that the app sends the user at the end of the test process, and there's some colours involved in the top graphs there to identify left and right for, in this instance, a travelling irrigator, a rotary boom. And you can see the data points are set out along the graph, and you have some solid lines which are where you would expect, based on the information you've put into the app, to see the system performing. So you can see in this instance that the dots don't line up with the solid lines. So something is telling you that it's not quite right, albeit that you've got some fairly flat lines on the left-hand graph. So you've got a reasonably uniform distribution occurring through most of the distance of the equipment, but then you've got the clear outliers, the big kick-ups at either end, that are showing where the end nozzles are laying on water at a lot higher rate than the average. So that's not necessarily an immediate jump to the conclusion that something is wrong, but it's something that needs to warrant further investigation. It could be that a nozzle has been swapped, there might have been a maintenance program and something wasn't replaced like for like in terms of the way it was originally built, or it may be that something has deteriorated over time, but that's the sort of indication you'd get from it. You see at the bottom of the left-hand graph, we've got some other colours. So you've got a green Y and a red N. So green is good, like traffic lights. Greens go. N being red is not so good. So the depth of application is showing considerably higher than the expected depth that would have been put in. So red or orange are things that need to be investigated. On the other, on the right-hand performance assessment, you haven't got the same kick up on the left and right, but you have got slopes in the distribution. So they're not flat distributions across the page. Again, they don't match the target lines, the solid bars. And in the bottom section, you see you've both got those are orange exclamation marks. So those are a warning level to say something is also not right with the system. So that's kind of how the app works. It gives you an indication of what is out of range compared to the data that you put in. So it could be that you've entered the wrong target. So that's something to be clear on. But as long as you're accurate in your data input, then these graphs give you a really easy visual representation of things that you may need to go and investigate further.
And so in 7, what would your advice be for the person who received these reports in terms of their next actions?
I guess the first thing is don't panic. It clearly indicates something needs more attention. And it may be that you want to just check the way the test was done. Were the conditions actually correct? Was the test conducted exactly the way it told you can conduct it? Was the data entry correct? So first challenge the method. But then it's probably something that if you are not confident that you can identify the problem, it may be that the system was running at the wrong pressure. And this is what I say about the bucket test. This report doesn't report flow rates and pressures and things that you might have done through a full performance assessment. If you're not confident as an operator of the app to make those decisions, that's when you probably do need some expert advice on how to interpret the information. Has something seriously gone wrong with the way the system's set up? Goodness, if people fiddled with the pump station, you know, if settings been changed with variable frequency drives, has someone done something in a maintenance program to change nozzles that weren't like for like? So the response to this would be to do further investigation.
No, that's really helpful. And I think this is just another example, which is from a pivot, which, again, as you say, has some of the, uniformity is reasonable, but the applied depth's different to what the person had anticipated it to be. And so what can some of the reasons be for that, and what would you suggest people do in this instance?
Well, again, yeah, look, the uniformity looks pretty good. You've got nice green for go Ys, so that's within the expectation for that particular machine. Again, based on what the data that's input, and that uniformity is shown in relatively flat dots across the page. But the solid bars that indicate the target would suggest that it's not as expected, and looking at the number of 3.7, 3.8, etc., and the target set at 5, it could be that something was incorrectly set up with the speed of the pivot irrigator. Maybe the rate of travel over the ground wasn't correct. It could be a pressure issue, but more likely, because you're showing very even distribution uniformity, it's more likely to be a speed issue with this particular machine. So therefore, it could be an operator error or a setup error, as opposed to something fundamentally wrong with the machine.
Like that's good. And I think, this is where one of the things I know with, as we talk with customers is quite often when they do a bucket test, the applied depth is different to what they anticipate that they're putting on. And so I think this is a really great benefit of doing a bucket test, is that, sort of linking up, is the pivot still delivering what you thought it did when it was initially commissioned?
Yes.
And the chance to go back and just check that you're getting the best out of that investment that you've made.
Yes, so just you've nicely mentioned commissioning, and those that have seen some of my publications elsewhere know that I'm really hot on commissioning. It's part of what we teach in our design qualification. Commissioning is done at the end of the construction contract. It's when you're handing the keys over, if you're a system installer or supplier installer. And that gives you the benchmark. That's the opportunity, effectively, while your contractors are still engaged on site, to make sure that the system is performing the way the designer expected. And we know that there's always things where a design on a page sometimes doesn't translate to things on the ground for various reasons. There may have been some issues that needed to be resolved in the construction phase. So commissioning gives you the benchmark. All your performance assessments that go into the future that might be done yearly or 3 yearly or 5 yearly, whatever is recommended, are performance assessments. And therefore, if you've got a really good commissioning report that says this is what you should expect in terms of as new, you've got a very good reference point for all your future bucket tests to make sure that your results are meaningful in terms of what it was originally.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that is a really good point. I've just got one question that Elsa has popped in the chat. Her question is, where your pivot is on rolling hills, is it impossible to get a 80% DU as the pressure is not even?
Yes, I think you said it is impossible to get a DU of 80%. Yeah. Where the pressure is not even. Look, your designer would have to take that into consideration. If you have significant elevation change, in addition to pressure loss down a lateral, down each span from the tower to the far end, the function between flow rate and pressure will affect distribution uniformity. It may mean that it probably highly likely means you need pressure regulators at every nozzle to compensate for pressure change and elevation change down the length. Now, with all sprinklers and the design process, there is a tolerance. There's an acceptable pressure variation because you can't get it anything 100% right, and we're not looking for 100% DU. We're not looking for 100% performance uniformity. But within a well-designed machine, you would expect not to have to compromise due to where the machine has been placed, and that is a obligation on the design process to make sure that the system is appropriately specified within an acceptable KPI expectation.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I think these, as you say, there's often challenges in the physical topography that some irrigation's done in New Zealand, isn't it? That makes it that design has to be take a lot of things into account, which sometimes can be a little bit in conflict with what you're trying to achieve overall. And we were chatting a little bit earlier, and you were mentioning that, as time has gone on, not only have irrigators become more, have deepened their understanding about what makes good irrigation management, but the regional councils have also, I guess, sort of changed their thoughts or their requirements and what they're expecting irrigators to be doing and demonstrating. And maybe if you could just, talk about where you see the role of the bucket test, particularly how that relates to more formal performance assessments and what regional councils are expecting or wanting to be seen happening in terms of assuring irrigation performance now and how that's changing.
Yes, well, I guess one leading the other in terms of knowledge within the industry, in terms of what is possible and improvement and more precision and more accuracy in the design process, and therefore the expectation of the regulatory environment to require certain standards to be met, and trying to make sure that those are matched up. And we're seeing that through some fairly sophisticated regional council processes through the country, and they do vary from region to region in terms of how water use efficiency for irrigation is measured. The thing that I guess we're seeing consistently is the expectation of a council on the operator of an irrigation system to understand what they're doing, understand what their scheduling is, how are they going about scheduling, are they adjusting seasonally, are they adjusting for crops, are they adjusting for soil type differences across their property, how they're dealing with those in terms of land management units, the term that we would use in a design process. And have they got confidence that the equipment that they use, and if they turn the system on at the beginning of the season, that it is actually operating the way they expect? Because we have seen instances of equipment that literally has had no servicing or maintenance conducted for years. There is very little confidence then by the operator that it's still doing what they thought it did, and yet if they haven't adjusted the way they're operating their irrigation scheduling, it could be that they are using water inefficiently, they may be washing nutrients away unexpectedly, and it may be involving a lot more energy for pumping than they should be spending money on. So the bucket test as a readily available tool with a simple, easy to use process is a great way of just giving themselves confidence that things haven't changed. But I don't think that there is consistency enough to say that that should be a regulatory compliance tool in itself. The bucket test app provides a certain set of information to an operator, but it needs to be supported by other observations and explanations of how they go about their water management. And I think that's starting to be seen in the regulatory environment. And as we transition into freshwater farm plans, in terms of the concept around risk and actions, that would be a risk. The risk is that your machine is not working the way you thought, and the risk is therefore that your irrigation scheduling is inaccurate for the particular situation. Your action would be inform yourself better, understand it, test it, and get some expert advice within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good sort of segue into the next part that we just want to cover is the irrigation system is part of it, but your scheduling and how you use it, the information you bring to that is the other part of it. And those two things have to marry up. And I think your reference to the freshwater farm plans is timely in the sense that this what's required of farmers and irrigators is only going to keep changing. We don't always know exactly what it will change to and what that will mean, but what you did in the past is unlikely to continue to be satisfactory. And so just keeping on, how can I keep getting better? How can I learn more? How can I support and verify the actions that you're taking? And so the last part that we want to just touch on in this webinar this morning is around computer's frozen up. There we go. Easy to use tools. So, you know, as Stephen mentioned, that being able to demonstrate whether it's to the just for your own benefit, for the regional council and their compliance requirements, or to the water irrigation scheme that you receive water from, that you've got a good base that you're making your irrigation decisions is more and more important. And so I think, as you know, irrigators, you say, what should you look for in choosing the tools? And obviously CropX is a provider in its capacity as a farm management platform, and water irrigation management service is a provider of that. But just thinking more broadly, one of the most important things I think that you know, in selecting how you go about filling out that part of the requirements is you need to have something that delivers you consistent soil moisture measurement. So being able to, you know, in 2023, to select a service that provides you near real-time constant measures of what soil moisture status is, where you've got soil moisture meters deployed, is sort of step one. The second step then is putting that in context. So being able to have a method that enables that field capacity to be set correctly, and to have that updated, because if the measure of soil moisture by itself obviously is just a number, it needs to have some context around it, and that's a very soil type specific understanding. So having a system that enables you to understand not only soil moisture, but what the field capacity and referral point settings are at any point in time, is step two. And then the third part of that is saying, well, now that I know my soil moisture, I know field capacity, what does that mean in terms of the scheduling that I should put in place? And then that's matching that up with what your irrigation system is and how it delivers water, what the weather forecast is, what your crop is, what the crop's requirements are going to be, and all of those things coming together to provide that insight into whether you should be irrigating or considering irrigating or not. And as we continue to move into a phase where the climate is anything but regular, and we can seesaw between warm, windy days and significant rain, actually being able to keep on top of that and have a good view about what's coming, irrigate only when needed, is actually just these basics are actually very complicated to pull all together. So looking for a service that can deliver all of those things for you in a very easy way that not only yourself but your staff and other people involved in irrigation can access. And then I think the final thing with that is actually the service and support that goes with that. So again, saying, you know, what amount of service or support can you get from the provider of that service? So are they there to back you up when you've got a question, or if something happens? One of the challenges here in New Zealand, a lot of irrigation's done in fields that have animals in them, and they're very keen on chewing things. And so every now and again, inadvertently things go out. So just getting those basic key things, just like the bucket test is all about the key elements of your irrigation performance. There's some just key basic things that I think soil moisture management needs to have to support good irrigation management. And then I think going back to where we started the webinar, there is so much coming in terms of advances in how we add on to direct measures of soil moisture and linking up with irrigation. So, you know, if you are choosing a provider, you know, considering about where they're at in terms of their overall platform, the different R&D and new ways of assessing soil moisture and plant water requirements and integrating with different irrigation systems, where they're on that journey, and then how scalable that solution can be for what your needs might be. So as Stephen mentioned, with the requirements around the freshwater farm plans, over time, it's likely that irrigators will require more and more data and accounting for, at a more granular level, the variability that most properties have in terms of soil types and crop types. So again, choosing a system that supports being able to scale that up in a way that, again, is still simple and straightforward and delivers the insights at a level with the complexity, but still in a way that's very simple and easy to engage with. As I said, CropX is, we're a provider here in New Zealand and globally for these services for irrigators, and we're more than happy to provide demonstrations of our technology, how we do that, but we're not the only business here in New Zealand doing that. We're very happy that we're involved in supporting Irrigation New Zealand with the bucket test, which is one part of irrigation management, and we're also there to support you with irrigation scheduling and a much broader platform than that CropX now provides. But that is the end of the sales pitch on that. But I think just thinking about these, the really important things to be able to meet these ever changing requirements on irrigators to be able to show that we're using water wisely and not leading to environmental degradation in the process. So that's the end of the formal presentation. Oh no, actually I've got one more thing to go, is if we'll just move on to questions. But what I just want to leave everyone with is that if you have you're a user of the bucket test or you're planning on using the bucket test, do make sure that before you start doing tests for this season that you download the latest version of the app. So there's always a few tweaks and changes, fixing up bugs or making a few enhancements. So there's a release was done just this last week. So the latest version is version 2.1. So if you go to either the Play Store or iTunes and just either update or download the latest version before you get going, and that should have iron out a couple of little niggles from the end of last season. But we're always here, our 0800 number, or through info.nz@cropx.com. So if you're using the bucket test and getting stuck or have some questions, have difficulty accessing any of the reports, please feel free to get in touch with us. And we are always there on the end of the phone or the email to help you. I know our customer support person would really like it if people have the auditor coming to perhaps ring the day before, not the day that they're just about to turn up. But we're always happy to be as much help as we can be in terms of supporting you to do that. Now, I do have one question here, which is another one for you, Stephen, from anonymous attendee. As the bucket test app is only a calibration test, is this suitable for consultants to use for commercial gain? Noting that many of these consultants are not irrigation experts. Often, if the test is done by the wrong person, it has no benefit to the farmer, often needing retesting by a second company. Do Irrigation New Zealand have a plan to address this?
Okay.
I think we've partly covered that, but I'll leave you to answer.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to cover that. I'll just jump back to the previous question around distribution uniformity on undulating ground, and I see in the chat Quinn provided a very good answer as well, and that when you get a more complex system with more moving parts and you've got water quality issues, then I guess what he's suggesting is that you have to have a very good maintenance, repair and maintenance program running as well to deal with things that you could reasonably expect to fail or become less reliable than they were when they were new. So that was a good point from Quinn over R&M. But look, this question from Anonymous, that's fine. Look, we are a voluntary organisation. All the codes of practice that we've developed over the years are voluntary. Some regional councils have picked up codes of practice and refer to them generally in the regulations. Very few regional councils write into consent conditions the use of some of the codes of practice, but what they often refer to as someone that is suitably qualified to do certain activities. So suitably qualified would suggest that people have gone through training and that training was consistent with the national standards. So the standards that we follow for some of our training for performance assessors is the New Zealand Certificate in Irrigation System Performance Testing. And that has a training program and an assessment program, and that's done to an NZQA standard. There is no it is still voluntary as to whether anyone does that, and there's still voluntary as to whether that is accepted as the suitable qualification that is referred to by the regulators. And INZ only has, well, it has no regulatory or legal powers of itself to enforce the adoption or use of particular processes. And, you know, the question of commercial gain, having been a consultant for some decades prior to coming back into Irrigation New Zealand, I think it's not up to Irrigation New Zealand to say whether someone should be selling a service, but we certainly understand that the use of the bucket test app is just a tool that may be provided as part of a service, but we would be hoping that people that are offering recommendations based on those numbers that are generated were suitably qualified to make those recommendations. And the thing we can do is to keep the communication going on what the value of systems, the value of codes of practice, and the value of training is, but we're not the regulator in that regard.
Yeah, Stephen, people who have done the Irrigation New Zealand training courses and passed them, their certification or is that listed on the Irrigation New Zealand website, or it's for people to attach to their own website? You know, how if a farmer's wanting to be sure that they are accessing a person who is suitably qualified to do this work, how can they be sure of that?
Yes, we generally do list and maintain a record of who's gone through our courses, and then someone that holds that qualification, that's their record of learning, and they can put it on their business card or their company profile, and should be proud of getting through the course. Now, you can learn to drive a car and pass a driving test, and you don't necessarily stick to the speed limit. So it does require a high level of integrity by the people that have gone through courses to actually adhere to the recommendations of what they were taught. And the teaching is pretty consistent. I'm involved in delivering some of that teaching, and certainly we've closely moderated on the quality of what we deliver, but individuals need to adopt the intent of all of that, which is to follow best practice, we rely on the industry to a certain extent to regulate itself in that regard.
Yes, yeah. No, I think that's right. And well, and as much as a person can seek out someone whom has invested their time and energy in training, and hope that they will bring all of that to bear when they provide services to them. Yeah.
Correct.
No, that's good. Well, I think we don't have any other questions in the chat, and we're just about up on our time. But I just wondered if you had any final comments or thoughts, Stephen, in terms of, where good irrigation management is, and what we should be striving to do as we move into irrigation season 23 or 24.
Look, over 4 decades of irrigation, and the rate of change has been dramatic. The level of knowledge is improving. We, as Irrigation New Zealand, when I was first involved with that back in the early 2000s, the conversations that we have with the industry, with farmers, with the service industry, with the regulators, whether that's local government or central government, the conversations have shifted. Delivering training courses, we used to get a lot of pushback on some of in the early stages of recommending best practice, and people say, well, we haven't got time to do that, that would be too expensive. Almost across the board, when we're delivering some training courses around design standards and KPIs, people say, yeah, we adopted that, our company is on board. Can we look at what's coming around the corner, or around the corner over the horizon? Data and data management could be overwhelming in terms of the quantity and the quality of data. And so it's the analysis and what you do with data rather than lack of availability. And so the analysis and interpretation is probably where we're going to see advances. Will that ever replace intuition? I always argue that farmer intuition is something that should never be underrated, but it can be supported with good data and good science, sometimes to verify that their intuition was right. But sometimes it's also to actually tweak their understanding and add nuance that maybe modern regulations and the expectation and that whole social license of irrigation is under enormous pressure. So people have to be working at the top of their game. So gaining knowledge and attending courses is really, really critical.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think that's right. There's always something to learn, isn't there? So if you stop learning, then you're going backwards. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, everybody who has joined us this morning, and I hope you've learned something, have got some thoughts to take away.